I want to end the lecture on Gettier and Gettier cases by calling your attention to the fundamental feature that drives those cases and making sure that we don't fall into the trap of mischaracterizing that feature. So recall when Gettier first published his paper, the response was, oh, wait, there are these false intermediary beliefs in the inferential chain from the initial belief to the target belief. And because they're false, they are incapable of facilitating the transfer of justification. And we responded to that by giving examples where false beliefs in an intermediary inferential chain weren't necessary to establish this intuition that the person was justified in their true belief, and yet they also satisfied our intuition that they didn't actually know what they believed in those circumstances. And so it's not false intermediary beliefs, but it's also not inferences, though Gettier cases certainly pose a problem for our mechanism of inferential transfer of justification. Through that inference, we transfer justification and all the theories that we've talked about so far. And some of them, that is really the only mechanism. For instance, bonjour, that's the only real mechanism of justification, transference, or justification for belief at all. So inference is crucially important here. But when we actually look at it, I characterize it as misleading evidence. Those cases that we introduced in response to the initial objection, those were all cases where there was some basis for an inference, there was some basis for a perceptual judgment, there was some correlation, some feature of the world that underlied the transition from the initial information to the belief, whereby the belief was justified. The Gettier cases then said, okay, there's that relationship, but that relationship that holds normally and that drives our intuition that the person is justified. We're going to tell a story now why it's the case that this special relationship doesn't hold now. The person doesn't know about that, so we still have this intuition that from their perspective they seem justified. Nevertheless, from our perspective, we recognize that, hey, that principle, that relationship, that feature of the world actually doesn't hold now. And so now we see the person as not knowing, precisely because that relationship between evidence or initial information and the resultant belief that is normally perfectly good is violated in these circumstances. And the Barn case is a nice example of that. The Barn case just illustrates this fact beautifully because the person is just making perceptual judgments about what category the buildings that they see fall into. So they're just judging those things to be barns. And this is a very sort of Platonic kind of exercise, all the way back to the Theaetetus. But the normal relationship between how these buildings appear when they are barns and the fact that they're barns gets broken by the performance artist. The performance artist introduces all these paper mache barns. So that relationship between the initial information and the belief, which normally seems to confer justification for a judgment, for an inference, and so on, that is seen to be violated, and that undermines our intuition that the person actually knows. They believe for these reasons don't actually hold anymore. And that is the crucial element that we want to keep in mind as we move forward thinking about these cases. Now, that isn't to say that these cases don't have strong implications for that inferential transfer of belief. It could be that the initial information gets tainted somehow, and it could be that the principle that underlies our inference is violated. And any case like that will give us a Gettier case. And this is, in fact, what Gettier relies upon. He has us do these deductive inferences, knowing full well that deduction is specifically designed to preserve truth. So that if I don't have a true belief someplace, it won't preserve truth, and hence the purpose, the point, the value of deductive inference is undermined because of that. And we can find the same thing in the barn example, because it undermines the relationship that we find in our experiences between the way the buildings appear and the kinds of buildings they are. And this, of course, is an underlying inductive relationship. Our experiences in the past no longer are transferable. The relationships that we've seen from our past experiences aren't valid in our new circumstances. So we'll want to keep this in mind, that difficulty that these expanded or generalized Gettier cases pose. It's not a problem just for inference. It's not a problem for false beliefs in intermediate stages. It's a problem about whether or not the principle, the relationship, the feature of the world that we rely upon is in fact violated in this set of cases that we look at.